Tonight, the Prime Minister tells the country everything has changed, which is why he's announcing the biggest rise in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. Just ahead of his trip to meet Donald Trump in Washington later this week, Starmer announces defence spending is going up to 2.5% of GDP by 2027. To help pay for it, the international aid budget is being drastically cut. Starmer's describing it as a painful choice, so I'll be speaking to the chair of Parliament's International Development Committee. I'll also be joined live from Latvia by the Defence Minister, Luke Pollard. Also tonight, protests here in Westminster as care providers warn the UK social care system is at breaking point. And as musicians warn about the threat of AI by releasing a silent album, we'll take a listen to what they're up against. Definitely not keeping quiet tonight, Nick Ferrari and Hannah Bardell, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Now, there are some moments in history where time seems to speed up. Change just doesn't happen incrementally. There are transformative periods and others of relative stability. And right now, it feels like the world is transforming. The post-war consensus is being questioned politically, socially, economically. We're living through a global transformation. But Britain is not immune. And today we saw, in many ways, the first real concrete response by Keir Starmer. Britain is arming up. Defence spending will rise to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, which means £13.4 billion a year more. And that will be partly funded by cutting the aid budget. Another consensus being ripped up. Now, this is Keir Starmer less than 4 years ago.
British aid saves lives. It builds a more secure world and it promotes democracy and British soft power. For the last 20 years, that has been the political consensus across this House.
Political consensus no longer. It wasn't just Labour, by the way. This is David Cameron back in 2010.
This country, almost alone amongst other countries, is going to meet the UN target of 0.7% of our gross national income for overseas aid by 2013. We have made difficult choices under this government in order to deliver that and to keep our international promise to some of the poorest people in the world. And I think every party in this House can be proud of the role that they will play in making sure that Britain stands up for aid in our modern world.
Now, cutting international aid is just one way of dismantling the consensus, although it's probably fair to say that some seem to be happier about it than others. Here's Donald Trump talking about cutting the US aid budget a couple of weeks ago.
USAID, run by radical lunatics, and we're getting them out.
Just compare that to how Starmer talked about cutting the UK aid budget in the Commons this afternoon.
I want to be clear to the House. That is not an announcement I am happy to make.
He says he's not happy about it, but, I guess sometimes that's almost the point. Change is happening. Britain is just a small fish. We're probably not big enough to change the tide. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, has tonight's first report.
Our nation on a war footing, facing the reality of a changing world. And in these tense times for Europe and the UK, the Prime Minister now taking a decisive step.
Prime Minister.
Coming to the Commons to announce the biggest sustained hike in UK defence spending in decades.
We must change our national security posture because a generational challenge requires a generational response. That will demand some extremely difficult and painful choices.
As the US calls on Europe, Keir Starmer stepping up.
This government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. Yeah. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so that we reach that level in 2027.
The government says this amounts to an extra £13.4 billion a year, but this just the start.
Subject to economic and fiscal conditions, and aligned with our strategic and operational needs. We will also set a clear ambition for defence spending to rise to 3% of GDP in the next Parliament.
That comes at a cost, the Prime Minister cutting the overseas aid budget to pay for defence.
It can only be funded through hard choices. I want to be clear to the House. That is not an announcement I am happy to make.
Can be Bardell.
But his opposite number liked what she heard.
I welcome his announcement on repurposing money from the overseas development budget. That is absolutely right. And I look forward to him taking up my other suggestion of looking at what we can do on welfare. He will know that we had a fully funded plan and we urge him to take it up.
And while the Commons was united as ever over support for Ukraine, MPs divided over the Prime Minister's decision to take aim at aid.
Whilst we support increasing defence spending, we cannot support the populist playbook of cutting foreign aid.
Given the importance that overseas aid plays in preventing conflict, building democracy and curbing warmongering tyrants, and to paraphrase his Foreign Secretary, surely this too is a massive strategic and moral mistake.
After the Commons, the Prime Minister to a press conference in Downing Street. For months you've refused to give a time frame of when you'd hit spending 2.5% of GDP on defence, and now you've accelerated that. Isn't the simple reality that a Trump White House has now bounced you into that acceleration and that decision? And you say this is a generational moment, you reference the Cold War. You sound like a Prime Minister on a war footing. Should viewers be alarmed at how significant this moment is?
But this is a significant moment. I think in our heart of hearts, we've all known that this decision has been coming for 3 years, since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine. The last few weeks have accelerated my thinking on when we needed to make this announcement. And the first duty of government is to ensure that its citizens are secure, and that is why I'm taking that as a matter of duty and responsibility today.
This has been a massive moment, a once-in-a-generation moment, because Keir Starmer has been forced to acknowledge that the US under Donald Trump is no longer the reliable partner that the UK and Europe have counted on for decades. So what we are seeing is something more than just talk about defence spending, as crucial as it is. This is much bigger. It's about a changing world order that our Prime Minister simply cannot ignore. Number 10's made its move. Now we wait to see whether the huge commitment from the PM here will find favour in Washington on Thursday when it comes to talking Donald Trump into a more favourable peace deal for Ukraine. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
A pretty momentous announcement then. In a moment, we'll be getting reaction from the US, clearly designed with this in mind. Mark Stone is in the White House. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, is in Ukraine. But first, though, I just want to bring in our political editor, Beth Rigby, who is here with me in Westminster. You said it there in your report, Beth, when you were talking about how this is Keir Starmer who finds himself in a changing world, and it did feel like a pretty big response from him.
It was a significant moment, and it was a Prime Minister, and I said on a war footing, and actually I looked back to when was that phrase first used, around the 2.5% of GDP spend, of GDP on defence, and it was actually Rishi Sunak that used that language when he announced originally upping defence spending. Now, clearly, the Prime Minister understands he now needs to accelerate that. He's also made a nod to the 3% target post-2030, should they win another election. But it comes against a backdrop of not just a short-term decision to try to get through the meeting with Trump on Thursday, but a decision of substance, acknowledging that the UK is facing a change in risk and a change in world. where the peace dividend, if you like, post-Cold War, where allies felt safe and they chose to invest in education and welfare and other spending areas, that now they need to invest in their security. And sure, it has been accelerated by Donald Trump because he wants NATO allies to spend more on defence, but it's also an acknowledgement that the UK needs to put this above other commitments. And the Prime Minister said at that press conference, as a Labour Prime Minister, I don't want to cut the aid budget, but I need to cut the aid budget. But on the question about why now in terms of Trump, you know, I said to some people in Number 10, do you think this will help when you go to the White House with your asks around security guarantees for Ukraine? And they said, yes, we do. But this is actually not just about now. It is about resetting our defence budgets, which have been hollowed out over years. Look, what's the Prime Minister now going to Washington with? He's already made it clear that he will put UK troops into peacekeeping forces on the ground if there's a buffer zone between Ukraine and Russia. And now he's also committing to that 2.5% by 2027. Trump is calling on NATO allies to spend 5% of GDP on defence. So he is going to the White House saying, look, I'm trying to meet you some of the way in the hope that that will help allies, European allies, get Trump to fall into line, because Europe at the moment cannot afford cannot guarantee Ukraine's security against a Russian aggressor without the help of the US. So he still needs Donald Trump, but he is trying to show leadership in Europe.
Thank you very much indeed, Beth Ridley there. Just as we were talking, an email from the Downing Street spokesperson has just popped into our inboxes. It's a readout from a phone call between the Prime Minister and the French President, President Macron, saying the Prime Minister said he was looking forward to travelling to the US this week, and the leaders reflected on President Macron's visit to Washington yesterday. They agreed that President Trump's leadership in working towards a durable peace in Ukraine was welcome, but they did reiterate that Ukraine must be at the heart of any negotiations, and the UK and Europe are ready to play our part. The leaders look forward to speaking again soon after the Prime Minister returns from Washington, DC. Well, with that in mind, let's go to the US, shall we? We can speak to Mark Stone. We just got the readout, of course, from the call between France and the UK. I do wonder sometimes how pleased Keir Starmer is that Macron managed to pip him to the post. But do you think this was an announcement with an eye on that meeting with Donald Trump later this week?
Yes, on that readout, incidentally, I think what they did is compare notes, because I imagine both sides definitely wanted to compare notes. Macron was the first European leader here to the White House. Yeah, maybe he did pip Keir Starmer to the post in a very Macron-like way, but actually I wonder on that whether it was quite useful. Macron came first. He did what Macron does, honestly, better than Keir Starmer, not least because he has an existing relationship, a relationship that goes back quite a few years with Donald Trump, and so he did that kind of the bromance that we saw yesterday. I don't think Keir Starmer is able to do that. I don't think he necessarily needs to do that. That was Macron's job. They've compared notes now, and on Thursday, Keir Starmer will be here, and with him he will bring that announcement that effectively will say, although he won't frame it quite like this, but it will say, look, Mr. President, you said we should spend more. Well, look, we are spending more. I know that British officials have been in and out of this White House complex over the course of the past couple of days, preparing for a meeting between an American president and a British Prime Minister that I think is probably more important than any meeting of that type since World War II. Those are the stakes here for this meeting, and the fact that that Keir Starmer has been able to make this announcement. I thought Beth's question in her report there, great question, and I thought his answer, Keir Starmer's answer, was pretty direct. He effectively said, yes, it is because of the Trump presidency that we've accelerated our decision, that we've come round to committing to this spending. Now, effectively, do you remember, Sophie, for so many months, as we wondered whether Donald Trump might win the election, there was all that talk about, will Donald Trump leave NATO? Would would that actually happen? And everyone was like, well, no, of course he won't. He'll never leave NATO, not least because he needs Congress to do that. Well, do you know what he seems to have done? He has kind of exited NATO without leaving it, because he's opened up so much doubt in everyone in Europe's minds about whether or not America really has Europe's back. And so he's focused their minds, and the consequence is that they are now doing what they needed to do and beginning to spend a lot more. And if you want an example of how the Americans are feeling about the Prime Minister's announcement, well, you only have to go to social media. Where else? Because Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, has tweeted in the last while, just got off the phone with John Healey, that's the UK Defence Secretary, who confirmed that they will increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP and eventually much further. And he concludes, the US Defence Secretary concludes, a strong step for an enduring partner. And then the emojis of the US and UK national flags. So I think at the embassy here in Washington, in Downing Street, job well done. They will be pleased that their announcement has gone down well and sets the ground well for a whopping important meeting on Thursday.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there reporting for us from the White House. Right, let's go to Kyiv in Ukraine next. We can speak to our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes. Deborah, you've done an awful lot of reporting on defence spending, talking to lots of people in the military about how they see it. How do you think the announcement today is going to go down with some of the people you've been speaking to?
I mean, people are breathing a huge sigh of relief because this announcement is dragged out, really, given the acuteness of the crisis in terms of the UK's hollowed-out defences, comes as this strategic defence review has been rumbling away in the background. You'll remember Lord Robertson was asked by the Prime Minister and John Healey to conduct this external review of the UK armed forces within an envelope of defence spending only rising, inching up from 2.3% of GDP to 2.5%. And from all of the sources that I've been speaking to around that process, obviously it's dominated the main building over the last 6 months, say that the only answer when you look at the state of the UK defences is that you need a lot more money. Yes, of course, you need reform. You need to spend that money better. You need to exploit to the maximum extent new technologies, artificial intelligence, drone, autonomous machines, satellites, all of that whizzy kit. But fundamentally, the British military, in terms of its core responsibility of defending the UK and backing its allies in NATO, meeting its NATO commitments, it currently cannot do that in terms of its current capabilities, and it needs a lot more investment fast. And if this announcement hadn't come, you would have been looking down, Keir Starmer would have been looking down the barrel at significant military cuts happening in this year. The fact that he's come out and said that there will be an increase in defence spending, it's not as much or as fast as people would have liked. People are breathing a sigh of relief to that, but it doesn't end the problem. The UK Armed Forces, if they are really going to step up into this leadership role that they naturally fill when it comes to European security, especially as the Americans are stepping back, they will need not just to invest more in their military, to expand their defence industrial base, but it's also about a mindset amongst the population. If you look back to the Cold War, which was the last time the UK really did national defence and national resilience with any form of credibility, it was something that involved the whole nation. There was something called the Government War Book, which literally set out instructions for the transition from peace to war in line with a set of NATO alerts. And they involved everybody, not just the military, not just the security services, not just the police, but local government, schools, hospitals, industry, the ability to stockpile food, water for every individual person and family to be responsible for themselves in a crisis. We are a long way off from that. That will require a significant change in the national mindset, the national lexicon. And the Prime Minister really kind of set the stage for that in what he was saying with that talk about the need for a generational response to a generational challenge. But whether he actually meets that with genuine, credible actions, that's what people will be watching.
OK, Deborah, thank you very much indeed. Deborah Haynes reporting there from Ukraine. Right, let's introduce our duo for this evening, shall we? The broadcaster Nick Ferrari and the former SNP MP Hannah Bardell. Great to have you both with us today. It felt like a big moment today, right? You know, the decision by Labour Prime Minister of everything, saying that he's going to cut the aid budget in order to spend more on defence. We're going to be talking more about the impact on the aid budget a bit later in the programme. But, Nick, what's your initial reaction to what we've seen?
Well, I'm going to take you back to Beth Rigby's question, to which the Prime Minister responded, well, we felt like this for about the last 3 years. Well, why has it taken him 7 bloody months to come to this decision? We've been hearing about this SDR, this Strategic Defence Review. Finally, we get the announcement, oh, just before he happens to board a plane to go to Washington. I wonder what's driven that on. So obviously this is the Trump effect, the Trump dividend, the Trump whatever it might be. We are now at a position where we need to be. He probably should have done it months ago, but the positive news is that we are now spending somewhere near what we should be spending. I would argue we probably need to spend more than 2.5, but at least we are on the right path. The roadmap has now finally been revealed.
Hannah.
I mean, there is no doubt that the tectonic plates of the world order are shifting right in front of our eyes. But I think, and we have, in the SNP and other parties have long called for increased spends in defence, you know, particularly for our conventional forces, and also, you know, countries like Scotland have a water border and have left it up to fishermen to spot, you know, Russian incursions at times, you know, but I think doing it at the cost of the international aid budget, the international development budget, is utterly reprehensible. And I know we're going to come on to that. But we have to ask ourselves, is this not Trump, you know, the Trump tail wagging the UK dog? And I think that makes a fair point about why it's taken so long. Why did the previous administration not, you know, invest more? I remember, you know, hearing those debates in Parliament and the impact on the armed forces, on veterans, on support for them, and also where is the strategy? If we're going to have boots on the ground along the border between Ukraine and Russia, where is the strategy for that? And what happens after those troops leave? And are those troops going to be properly resourced? Have we learned nothing from Iraq and Afghanistan?
Is there an issue, Nick, about, I guess, a kind of rush to spend money sometimes? I'm thinking a bit about the NHS when, you know, you sign up to targets of spending more before you've done the review. There's a lot of talk about getting to a target, not much talk about what they're actually going to spend it on.
The issue is highlighted by the continual obfuscation by the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Defence Secretary, who you've spoken with all the three and many others. When are we going to get this spending? When are we going to get this spending? And of course it's been brought into sharp focus by the conflict in Ukraine, by President Trump saying what he expects, and by other European countries either moving towards it or moving not. So yes, you're right. But I do think, with hindsight, they could have done this a few months ago because, to Hannah's absolute point, this is solely, and I'll say again, because our PM is on a jet to Washington. Let's not kid ourselves. And this at least, as Mark said in his report, this at least makes the opening salvo of the conversation between our Prime Minister and between the President. And let's hope they have all that hand-holding that he and Macron had. And I won't do it because it's inappropriate. And I will not about grabbing the knee and all of that. Maybe at least some of that can be a sideshow now because he's gone some of the yards that they'd be looking for.
Hannah, I'm interested in your view on this. Do you think that the government's clear decision to try and, I mean, cosy up is probably too strong, but to try and cosy up to get that relationship with Donald Trump is the right one?
No, I don't. I think it feels like appeasement, and it feels like we've got all these strong men in positions of power, you know, vying for who can be the most macho, and that is taking us further towards the brink, to the point that your reporter made about, you know, where we are, what we might be facing, you know, and I think we have to look back through history and learn those lessons. And it doesn't feel like we are going to learn those lessons. And we also find ourselves, I think, at a very dangerous moment. There is no doubt Donald Trump is a difficult character to deal with, absolutely. Okay. But should we not be going there and saying, we will spend more on defence, but we also want to see more money spent on international aid?
Okay.
and international development.
I'm out of time, but you are pulling some faces. So
Well, Hannah went to a different history class. That's all I'm going to say. If we look at the Cold War, if we look at Hitler, you went to a different history class to I. We've got to take a strong line.
There might be a bit of an age gap there.
There's a huge age gap. There's a huge gap.
And also,
I
people
agree.
want to know where the money's going to come from. And I would
was quite
argue,
good, I have to say.
People might want to know where the money's going to come from. And Trident would be your first port of call. Immoral, not required, out of date, and tens of billions of pounds that could be spent on defence and internationally.
We'll talk about it later. Thanks both very much indeed. Let's go straight to speak now, shall we, to the Armed Forces Minister, Luke Pollard, who joins us now from Latvia. Thank you so much for being with us. I guess you are delighted at the announcement today, more money for the Armed Forces, but of course it comes at the expense of the international aid budget. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's welcome news in the fact that we'll have more resources to keep our country safe. But this is a difficult decision that the Prime Minister's made today. I mean, it's certainly true that we face a once-in-a-generation crisis of pressure on the international system, on the safety of the United Kingdom and our allies, and that demands a strong response. That's what the Prime Minister has done today. We have a manifesto commitment to spend 2.5% of our GDP on defence. He has brought that forward, which means by April 2027 we'll be spending £13.4 billion more. But I think it's worth stressing that at that time we'll still be spending £9 billion on international aid. That international aid will be focused on war zones and areas that need it the most, the Middle East, Gaza, other places similar to that, to make sure that it is delivering the effect. But let's also be clear that we live in very dangerous times. It's not just that Putin is fighting an illegal war against our friends in Ukraine. It's not just that he sent a Russian spy ship to loiter over Britain's critical national infrastructure underwater cables at the end of last year. It's not just that he's assassinated people on the streets of Britain. It's that this is a threat facing the United Kingdom and our European NATO allies from all directions. That's why it's important we increase defence spending today.
You talk a lot about the threats, and that's the reason that you need to cut the aid budget in order to fund defence. Has someone told Foreign Secretary David Lammy about it? Because only 2 weeks ago he said Donald Trump's plans to cut the US aid budget could be a big strategic mistake that allows China to step in and further its global influence.
I mean, there's no easy solution here that the Prime Minister has missed, I'm afraid. Cutting the aid budget to pay for the increase in defence is a tough decision. It's a hard decision, but it's a necessary one.
David Lammy says it could be a big strategic mistake.
Well, it's a necessary decision to meet the threats that we're facing, and the increase in...
His point is that it's increasing the threat by letting other global actors like China step into that space.
Well, it's certainly true that we are seeing malign activities from a number of international competitors, Russia in particular, but not just Russia. And it's time, I think, that we have a frank reassessment of where we spend our budgets. Now, that means spending a part of the international budget, instead of spending it on soft power, spending on hard power capabilities. This is a tough choice. If there was an easier choice to make, it would have been made, but there's not. We're dealing with 14 years of underfunding and hollowing out of our armed forces. We're dealing with new threats facing the United Kingdom and our allies, and the necessity to get our armed forces battle-winning kit. We know that only 2 of 49 defence procurement projects were on time and on budget that we inherited in July last year from the previous government. We know that there's a retention and recruitment crisis in our armed forces. We know that far too many of our armed forces and their families are being asked to live in accommodation that's not good enough. That's why we've set out a plan to reform defence, a plan that will publish the new Strategic Defence Review in the spring, setting out what capabilities we'll be investing in, and a new defence industrial strategy that will be directing more investment,
we'll await to
especially
see,
more
the
increases at
details
UK companies.
Of that. But I just want to step through some of the numbers today, if I may. Keir Starmer in the Commons today said that the aid cut would fully fund the defence investment. So I'm just trying to work it out, I'll be honest. So Starmer says that by 2027, the increase will mean an extra £13.4 billion on defence. But by my calculations, the reduced aid spending from 0.5% to 0.3% of GNI by 2027 would only raise 5.3 billion. So where's the other 8 billion coming from?
Well, the £13.4 billion extra on defence is what's been committed today. The GDP figures for defence and the GNI, the gross national income figures for international development, are very similar, but ever so slightly different. And of course, the economy would have been larger in 2027 than it would now, and so that would deal with some of the issues, some of the money involved. But the key thing that we're announcing today is that there will be more defence spending.
So basically, what you're saying then,
3%
no, because genuinely, this is. I know your point about the defence spending. You've made it already. But just to talk about the numbers, then. So you're saying that increased growth basically is funding the bulk of this. I mean, I don't know if you've looked at the forecast really, mate, but isn't it a bit worrying to be like pinning your whole defence procurement strategy, which has to be done years in advance, on projections of GDP?
I mean, it's certainly right that this will help our growth mission, because increased defence spending supports the 430,000 jobs in the UK defence sector.
I'm just talking about, if you're funding this through projections on growth. That feels a bit, well, I don't know, it's a bit worrying, isn't it?
No, I mean, I'm pretty comfortable with the numbers that Prime Minister's announced today. The £13.4 billion extra is paid for primarily by reduction in the international aid budget, and that is what he has set out today. That's what this will deliver.
Is it primarily? I thought that most of it was coming from increased GDP, wasn't it?
Well, the Prime Minister's set this out today in the House of Commons, that we're having to make a difficult decision.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm just saying that I think, my calculations is that the increase is predominantly from increased GDP projections. Is that right? I mean, you must know this. You're the Armed Forces Minister. You tell me.
Yeah, I mean, the £13.4 billion extra is primarily being taken from the resources that have been moved from the international aid budget.
I thought that
there
was
is an
5.3
assumption
billion.
that the economy will grow as part of the 2.3% that we currently spend on defence. But this will help support our growth mission as a government, because one of the things that we are doing as a government is directing more of defence contracts at UK companies. Far too many defence contracts under the last government were sent abroad, which means we didn't get the tax and benefits that comes from that defence spending. We want more UK companies to receive the benefits of this increased defence spending, and we know that 68% of the jobs that defence supports are outside London and the South East. So this is a real engine for growth for our regional economies as well, and a big boost for our national security, which is necessary, I'm afraid, because of the difficult times that we are facing.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on the programme today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been talking about the numbers, whether they add up. Sky's Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has more.
Big announcements, big spending, big figures. That's what the Prime Minister wants you to know. But do the numbers stack up? This £59.8 billion is the Ministry of Defence budget in the coming year. It's the lion's share of military spending, which makes up 2.3% of our GDP. And this £13.4 billion on top is how much more Keir Starmer says it'll cost to increase defence spending to the government's new target of 2.5% of GDP. Now, that's an enormous amount of public spending. Some's designed to impress Donald Trump, but would require big, big cuts elsewhere to achieve. Now, Keir Starmer's getting tough, and he did today offer up one big cut to pay for it, slashing the aid budget. Now, that aid budget is due to be this much, 13.7 billion, which represents 0.5% of our national income. And Keir Starmer said today that this would drop to 0.3% of our national income. But here's the thing, that saves just short of £6 billion. And that's a big, big gap. So what does the government say about this shortfall? Well, quietly, the government admit to some creative accounting. This £7.9 billion figure is the gap between what we pay now for defence today and what it would have risen to anyway in 2027, because defence spending is pegged to GDP at 2.3% of it. Now, I wouldn't ordinarily call that section an increase in spending, but Keir Starmer can do that and therefore get a much more impressive sounding figure to brandish in front of Donald Trump. Now, Labour promised to raise international development in the manifesto, not cut it. So here's why they've done it. Exclusive YouGov polling, which shows the public back this move by a margin of 2 to 1, more than 2 to 1, 62 to 25. Labour voters like it much less. Look at that. But amongst voters who backed reform last year is an absolute belter. And voters really don't want to see cuts to other services to fund this increase. More money, that's clear today, but so much of this is actually a mystery. Keir Starmer said that some intelligence and security spending would count towards the target from 2027, and the government won't answer whether future payments to the Chagos Islands might be part of it too. And if we're being honest, once you start to prod, lots of bits of defence spending turn out to be pretty mysterious. Government departments refuse to give an overall total for defence spending, want to include things like intelligence. I asked for a complete list of what elements can count towards the 2.5 NATO target, and the government wouldn't tell me. Keir Starmer just doesn't want inconvenient facts distracting from the big picture. He just wants Donald Trump to understand we're paying a lot more for defence. He hopes it'll do the trick of the White House this week.
Sam Coates there talking through some of the detail. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the chair of the International Affairs Select Committee and Labour MP for Rotherham, Sarah Champion. Thank you so much for being on the programme today. So just first of all, what is your reaction to the cut we've seen in international aid?
I've got to tell you, I'm completely shocked. I had no idea this was coming. If there was going to be a cut to foreign aid, I would have assumed it would have come in the spring statement, which is the end of next month. So this is totally out of the blue, and I think it's the wrong decision.
You say that you're shocked by it. You're not even in Westminster, are you? Just talk us through where you are at the minute.
Well, that's the perverse thing. I'm actually with the committee up in Scotland because the FCDO has got a team up here. They don't get that much scrutiny, so that's what my committee is here to do. So we've come up for a couple of days to scrutinise them. So as we got on the plane from London this morning at about 11, I got a message from the Guardian journalist that covers this sort of area saying, have you heard anything about this? And I went, no, it's nonsense. And he said, well, you know, no one's answering my call. And I said, well, that's because we've got Foreign Office questions. They'll all be busy. And I said, you know, you're just making it up. And then by the time we landed, lo and behold, my phone was on fire. And yeah, there'd been savage cuts to the aid budget.
It's almost as if they waited for you guys to be, you know, out of town before announcing it.
I mean, I'd love to be that important, but I think that one actually is a coincidence.
Do you think it really is about the timing, I mean, about the Donald Trump trip?
Well, I've been a politician for 12 years now, and these coincidences keep on happening. So I think that the timing would be ideal if he wanted to go to Trump and make a commitment to the defence budget going up. But also we have to remember that Donald Trump has savagely cut the aid that America gives to the poorest in the world as well. So there does seem to be a bit of synergy and a bit more than a coincidence going on here.
Now, I just want to put to you the Keir Starmer argument, because what Keir Starmer said in the House of Commons today is that I want to be clear that this is not an announcement I'm happy to make, but at times like this, the defence and security of the British people must always come first. And there'll be an awful lot of people who agree with him, who say, yeah, look, we would love to be able to spend more money on aid if we could afford it, but we need to be safe. We need to get our defence spending where it is. The world is a dangerous place. And, you know, you've got sympathy with them.
Complete sympathy, because this isn't an either-or situation, and let me explain why. First of all, there is a misunderstanding about what aid development money is. This isn't just sort of charity given for nice reasons. This is money that is early intervention. It enables people to be safe in their home, to be prosperous in their home. And the reason that we have all of these conflicts, a lot of it is driven by unstable governments. A lot of it's driven by climate change, so farmers aren't able to sort of get crops in. A lot of it's driven by internal conflicts, so domestic violence, violence against women and girls, and development money.
Just on that, because you say it's about early intervention, but I guess the other argument is that the time for early intervention is over. There is a war in Europe now. Donald Trump is saying he's effectively pulling the plug on European security. Early intervention is great in times of stability and peace, but right now, don't we need tanks and troops?
Well, there's actually 140 conflicts in the world right now, not just the one in Ukraine. And of course, the other sort of perversity of all of this is the biggest ODA aid money going to any one country is to Ukraine. 250 million of aid money is going to Ukraine right now. So what I want to see is that absolutely our defence budget needs to be built up. I mean, there are so many threats that we're facing at the moment, and I think for decades we've been negligent in not giving our troops the support that we need, in not investing in the technology that we need. But also what we need is a stable world. And to be quite frank with you, democracy is under threat. We've gone down from about 50% of the population being under a democracy 20 years ago to now I think it's 32, 33%. And what we need to be doing is standing strong with democracies around the world. We need to create strong and stable governments that support their people, that support human rights around the world. And most importantly, you know, no one willingly leaves their home. They do it because they're hungry. They do it because they're scared. They're doing it because they're forced to. So what we do with our aid money is we enable people to stay safe in their own homes. Because to be quite blunt about it, a lot of the aid budget that we're currently spending is actually being spent on hotels in the UK for people that are fleeing conflict or are trying to make an economic future for themselves. If we could use that money so they stay safe in their own homes, then that helps everybody.
Just finally, you say that there is a need to increase defence spending, that has been negligent in the past. Where should Keir Starmer find the extra money from then, if not from the aid budget?
Well, it's really difficult, and I'm not saying I've got easy answers, but one of the problems is with the aid budget that he's cutting, that isn't going to meet the need of raising up our defence to 3%. So there's still a massive great gap. So there's still cuts to be had. And one of the things that I've always been struck by is the people that defend aid the most are actually our armed forces, because they know that that is the best way to create stable countries and not have conflicts. Wars are really expensive. And there's also the aftermath of the war. I mean, look at somewhere like Gaza, a small area, sort of, 23 miles by 4 or 5. That is going to take billions and billions of pounds to rebuild, let alone Ukraine. So really what I'm saying is we need to be looking in all of the piggy banks that we've got to see where we can make savings, to see where we can make cuts, to see where we can squeeze more money out. But it shouldn't be at the expense of, well, early intervention and also the poorest people on the planet.
Right, let's bring in Nick and Hannah again, shall we? Hannah, I could really tell in the first chat we had how passionate you feel about this cut to aid. Do you agree, I guess, with what Sarah Champion's saying?
I do very much. I think that, unfortunately, the interview with Luke Pollard just shows exactly why people get hacked off with politicians. To come on national television to talk about one of the biggest decisions in living memory around defence spending and not have the numbers and not have an explanation and saying it's primarily coming from from international aid money, when clearly the numbers don't add up. That to me is unforgivable. I think the points that Sarah made were really, really telling and very important around, I worked for the American Department of State and I saw some of a number of years ago under the Obama and Clinton administration, and I saw what cultural diplomacy, what money can do, international development money, and it's about community cohesion, anti-terrorism, anti-radicalisation. When we've got big challenges with, asylum seekers and immigration, and my view would be that we need to be able to support people when they come here, that we want to have a policy of welcoming people who are in need. But the reality is people flee their countries most of the time because they're war-torn, because of famine, or because they're being persecuted. And that is what international aid money and development money does. So for us to cut that and be spending more on defence money when, the reality is it will do serious damage. And we've seen, look at the situation in Sudan and the USAID money that's being cut, that the US is cutting that money. That has had a devastating impact there. And we shouldn't be following Trump in that.
Where's the war in Romania? Where's the war in Bulgaria? Where? You've just said they all flee wars. Sorry, remind me. They don't. They come here and I don't blame them. They come here. No, hold on. They come here, as my grandfather did, to make a better economic life. We've just heard from that MP that it's because farmers can't get their harvests in or whatever else it might be, which is all desperately serious, and women are victims of, which is desperately serious. But as the Prime Minister said in the Sky News report, the number one priority of the government is the security of the nation. I don't need to tell you. We've got a Russian president who orders the assassination of people in this country who has boats trying to cut our vital communication cables. That is the reality. And the British taxpayer can only spend, he or she can spend £1 only once. And currently, more has to be put to the protection of our people. And that is the reality. Yes, people come from Syria. Yes, people come from Afghanistan. But please don't tell me everybody comes here, they're fleeing the war. Palpably, they are not.
But if we'd done a better job there, Nick, do you not agree? If we had done a better
job where?
In places like Afghanistan, in places like
hang on, I'm talking about Albania, I'm talking about Romania, I'm talking about Bulgaria. There are no bloody wars there.
No, but there is no... But people often come because they're being persecuted. And also, post-Brexit, we have had huge areas, hospitality, the caring sector...
How the hell are you getting Brexit into it?
Because we have lost so many people. So many people have left the UK because of Brexit, because they couldn't work here.
We have to defend the nation. That is the crucial thing. Against an aggressive, overreaching Russian bear. And I find myself supporting Keir Starmer. This is a rare moment. I might have to go and lie down in a minute.
I'm not denying that, but it doesn't have to be one or the other, is the point I'm trying to make.
Well, it does. You can only spend £1 once, Hannah.
Yes, but you can take money from other places. Places like Trident.
Where are you going to...
If you scrap Trident, if you got rid of that nuclear warhead that we do not need, and we're never going to use it...
Hang on a second. So we are in a world in absolute jeopardy with people like North Korea and people like Russia and people like China, and we're going to actually denude our deterrent.
Do you think we're ever going to use that deterrent?
Please God, no, but we need it.
I would disagree. And a majority of people in Scotland, and I think still majority of politicians, are still anti-Trident. And there are many...
I don't know about that across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Maybe not across the United Kingdom.
All right, OK.
OK, well, look, this was...
Shall we have a peace?
Was basically...
Peace breaks out.
I really think this is very... You know, I feel like the two sides of the argument were, you know, very well articulated there, I have to say. Nick, one question I did want to put to you is, do you think there's any truth in this point that if countries like the US, like the UK, retreat from aid spending globally, then you're going to see people like China stepping into that void and trying to take over that soft power?
Doubt it. What's in it for them? Why would China seek to do that? Unless they can cause mischief and menace. Yes, I see that. That is a gamble. That is a gamble we will have. Sorry, sir. That is a gamble we will have to take. We can only go so far. And the people who are watching Sky News, who pay their taxes now, they deserve to be protected. And I think we're failing on the job.
I mean, I guess this is the other side of the coin, isn't it? That Keir Starmer says that, you know, Nick's articulated too, that look, you know, obviously we would love to spend money on international aid. Of course. But right now, the priority has got to be defence, and it's time for politicians, I guess, to be honest that sometimes there aren't going to be any winners, there's got to be a loser, and it's international defence.
But I think that's a false equivalence and a false comparison. And I think that's, you know, the very point that Sarah Champion made was that it does not have to be a one or another decision. And also, you know, we haven't seen a strategy yet from the UK government, and I don't deny that more money needs to be spent on defence, but we don't have a strategy to back that up. Does that amount of money need to be spent? Does that number of cuts need to happen to international aid and development? We don't have any answers on that, and I think fundamentally it should not be one or the other.
Right, I'm going to leave it there while peace has temporarily broken out.
The truce.
I know. We'll see if it lasts to the end of the break. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. We're going to be looking at social care providers who are marching on Westminster to tell the government the industry is on the brink of collapse. Welcome back. Social care providers have told Sky News they're on the brink of collapse thanks to rising costs, plus, of course, that rise in national insurance contributions that was announced in the budget. And as our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin reports, it could leave thousands without the help they need.
Around 3,000 social care workers marched on Westminster. Their message: they are at breaking point. A rise in national insurance contributions combined with an increase in the national minimum wage has led to warnings that some care providers simply won't survive this year.
Social care has been under huge pressure for decades, we all know that. So any added burden could be, to invoke a cliche, something that breaks the camel's back.
We're in this because we care, and you can't do this anymore. It's broken.
It is completely unprecedented. Local authorities tell us they don't have the money. Government tells us that they've given it to the local authorities. We're not playing piggy in the middle anymore. Somebody's lying.
We've been married 59 years in March.
Hello.
This is the kind of care campaigners say is at risk. Sheila was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2018.
You had enough?
Yeah.
Yeah?
And if carers don't come in to help her, husband Paul says she'd have to go into a home.
I think they're amazing.
I was going to say the prospect of being split up. Take me through how that would feel.
It would be very difficult after such a long time together. You can't imagine yourself being on your own and visiting a nursing home every day, or maybe not every day, because every day she wouldn't know me.
According to the Nuffield Trust, the rise in national insurance will cost adult social care an extra £900 million a year. Add in the rise to the national minimum wage and those additional costs rise to an estimated £2.8 billion.
So this is our domain, this is Applewood Support.
Jane Jones runs the company that provides care to Sheila and Paul. She's been in the industry for decades.
When you first heard the Chancellor say she was increasing national insurance contributions for employers, what was your first reaction?
I felt sick, physically sick. It worked out to be about £6,000 a month extra that I would need to find. We've got rid of 2 personnel in the office because we just can't afford it. It's soul destroying.
You know, the whole reasoning behind the Chancellor's budget was to encourage economic growth. It's her number one thing. But from what you're saying, it appears that it's had the opposite effect.
It's the complete opposite effect. It's an attack on our growth because we can't grow. We can't employ any more staff because we can't afford the NI. We cannot increase our costs like the supermarket can. We are limited to what the government councils can pay us. So if they can't pay us the right amount of money, we're just going to go close our doors. I'm sure that's going to happen in come April.
The social care sector has been in crisis mode probably for the last 30 years, and successive governments have failed to push through the kinds of reforms that could solve this crisis. And it is unusual to see carers and care providers protest on the streets like this. They say it's a sign of just how desperate things have become. Campaigners say the sums no longer add up as social care lurches from crisis to crisis. Nick Martin, Sky News, Westminster.
I just want to end on something slightly different. Is AI a threat to human creativity? Well, more than 1,000 musicians think so. British stars, including Annie Lennox, Damon Albarn and Kate Bush, have released a silent album called Is This What We Want? In protest to proposed changes to copyright law, which would allow big tech firms to ignore copyright rules when training artificial intelligence systems. Now, musicians including Andrew Lloyd Webber, Sir Paul McCartney, Sir Elton John and Ed Sheeran have all signed a letter published in today's Times urging the government to protect copyright against AI. Don't worry, we're not going to make Hannah and Nick sit through the silent protest album, but we did think we would use the bots to create songs about you. So we use an AI app called Udio to write some songs. So let's listen to Hannah first, shall we? Let's have a quick listen to Hannah. This is your song. What do you reckon?
Definitely the weirdest experience I've ever had.
Little song for you, Hannah. It's quite
Lovely.
romantic.
Yeah, but not as good as one that would be written by a real human being.
I'm not sure where this has come from either.
It's definitely from not from my back catalogue, I promise you.
And right, let's listen to Nick's. Here's
This
Nick's.
could be
Here we
quite
go.
ugly, I fear. Here we go.
Into the morning sound. Nick's got stories turning now. Voices rise as the airwaves found. He keeps the truth in both earth.
Was that the Sky News Choir? That was absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking. That wouldn't even start with the X Factor. Where would you get the buzzer? It's from 4 X's or whatever it was. Dreadful.
Well, that just tells you...
I mean, what you've done, sorry to talk over you,
No.
you know, from Andrew Lloyd Webber to Dua Lipa, right, and every national newspaper and regional, your brilliant writers there have just shown why it is so important, otherwise you'll be condemned to that.
I guess that is true, isn't it? Like, genuinely, that is a good point.
You cannot just let the entire back catalogue of every creative star that there has ever been just be given to the robots. Like, absolutely not. That is just not what, you know, what we have to allow to happen. We have to make sure that creativity can thrive and that there is sensible legislation and it's not just left to the big tech firms to come in and take over.
And then we just have to listen to atrocious music.
Yes.
Exactly. Otherwise you don't have to listen to that rubbish.
Well, they'll have you presenting this in 2090 AI if you're not careful.
Yeah,
you have to guard your copyright.
Probably
Sophie.
do a better job than me,
well,
to be
no,
fair,
I will
though.
not hear it.
I can
will
say
not hear it.
All right, great to have you both on the
much.
programme. That is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it's the UK Tonight, but I'll see you tomorrow.